problem is not what you feel. It's not what happens around you. And as painful as it may be to hear, the problem is also not what life has shown you so far. What keeps you stuck is the silent and invisible place from where you're observing all of this. There is an internal space that almost no one notices. A hidden field between you and reality that distorts what you see, amplifies what threatens you, and turns every detail of your day into yet another confirmation of what you fear the most. Maybe you think you're just perceiving things as they are, but the truth is that your observation is already contaminated, loaded with old filters, memories, judgments, unconscious conclusions you don't even remember creating. It's not the world that's limiting you, it's the way you look at it. Today, we're going to cross that layer. We're going to touch on a point that few have the courage to face: what exists beyond observation. Because until you understand this, you'll keep observing negatively, even when everything around you seems to be at peace. Even when silence arrives, your mind will look for what's wrong. It will search for what's missing. It will create tension where there is no threat. What you call reality may be just a mirror of your own resistance. And as long as your gaze remains trapped in this reactive field, life will only reflect back what you yourself are emitting. It's not about changing what you see. It's about changing the internal place from where you're seeing. You wake up in the morning. Even before you open your eyes, your mind starts mapping out the day, and almost without noticing, it looks for signs of problems, an appointment you don't want to face, a discomfort that might be appearing in your body, an unresolved conversation that may bring conflict. The internal field already wakes up on alert, as if the reality outside were a constant threat, waiting for the slightest slip to bring you down. This is the programming of the reactive field, a state of consciousness where observation is not neutral. It's loaded with the expectation of discomfort, lack, and resistance. Your gaze doesn't look for what's in harmony. It scans the environment for everything that could go wrong. And the quietest part of all this is that you don't even realize you're doing it. The human mind has been shaped by centuries of survival. In ancient times, identifying risks was a matter of life or death. The brain learned to prioritize what seemed like a threat. Neuroscience calls this the negativity bias, but what few understand is that this bias isn't just a neurological tendency. It has become a vibrational lens, an energetic filter that distorts how you perceive each moment. When you look at your body, your attention goes straight to the discomfort. When you look at your bank account, the focus locks on the lack. When you observe a relationship, your perception highlights the conflict. You may even have moments of gratitude, presence, and connection. But if you're honest with yourself, you'll realize that most of the time your consciousness operates in defense mode. And it's not by choice, it's by pattern. The reactive field is like invisible software running in the background, keeping you stuck in a vibration of emotional scarcity. It's as if there's a hidden program teaching your eyes to locate problems before they even exist. That's why, so often, you feel anxiety for no apparent reason. Tension even before any concrete event. A silent anticipation that something bad is going to happen, even when everything around seems apparently normal. This state creates an energetic feedback loop. The more you observe with resistance, the more the field around you returns situations that confirm your resistance. Your observation is not passive, it's creative. Every gaze loaded with fear, judgment, or negative anticipation collapses the quantum field into a reality compatible with your vibration. That's why you find yourself repeating the same patterns, the same uncomfortable situations, the same difficult conversations, the same scenarios of loss, frustration, or emptiness. It's not the universe punishing you. It's just the natural response to the type of frequency you're emitting through your gaze. And the most paradoxical thing is that the more you try to control your thoughts, the more the tension increases. Because the problem was never the thought itself, but the vibrational field that sustains your observation. Imagine someone walking through a forest with a threat detector turned on all the time. Even if the forest is calm, this person will hear noises where there are none, interpret shadows as dangers, and live in a constant state of alert. Now imagine that this forest is your life, and the threat detector is your own reactive mind. Until you recognize that you're operating inside this field, everything you observe will carry an emotional charge of defense, fight, or flight. And when your gaze is conditioned to find the problem, even peace feels strange. Even silence becomes a cause for concern. Even the absence of conflict generates anxiety, as if it were just a pause before the next fall. That's why trying to force positive thoughts or repeating affirmations without changing the internal state of observation almost never brings real results. Because it's not about what you think, it's about the energy with which you observe. The reactive field is like a dirty mirror. You can try to change the reflection, but until you clean the glass, the image will remain distorted. The work is not to alter the reality outside, it's to change the internal place from where you're looking. When you observe something with fear, with resistance, or with that subtle tension that something is about to go wrong, the field around you responds. But this response doesn't come in a direct or obvious way. It manifests as an echo, an invisible repetition that returns exactly the frequency you're emitting. And that's when the trap of negative observation begins to close. You feel something uncomfortable. You observe this discomfort. You judge what you're feeling. You react to the judgment, and without realizing it, you reinforce the state you so want to avoid. The more you observe what you don't like, the more the field organizes itself to show you increasingly clearer versions of that discomfort. The mind tries to solve this with effort. You look for new techniques, read books, make gratitude lists, repeat positive phrases. But deep down, the base remains the same. Your observation still comes from lack, defense, the attempt to control what you feel. It's like trying to get out of a maze, running through the same corridors, just at a faster speed. What makes this trap even more dangerous is that it's self-sustaining. Reality itself starts giving you more and more proof that you're right to resist. If you observe the world expecting rejection, it comes. If you expect lack, it arrives. If you fear failure, it approaches. And the more these scenarios repeat, the more you believe the problem is the world, other people, or even yourself. But the truth is that the problem was never external. It was never about events or people. It was always about the observation field you chose, even if unconsciously. There's a metaphor that illustrates this cycle well. Imagine someone shouting towards a mountain, angry at the echo they receive back. The person raises their voice, shouts louder, and the more they force, the more the echo returns exactly the same pattern. In trying to silence the echo, they only feed it. In emotional life, this echo is reality reflecting back the pattern of your observation. And the most painful thing is that, in this process, you begin to identify with your own pain. You start to believe that you are an anxious person, a negative person, someone incapable of change. And this identification deepens the cycle even more. You try to escape anxiety by observing the anxiety. Try to stop suffering by observing the suffering. Try to free yourself from fear, but keep looking at it with the same old lens. It's a subtle trap, because as long as you believe you need to control what you see, or that you need to force different thoughts, you'll remain trapped in the same vibrational structure, trying to solve the pain from the same level of consciousness that created it. And the quantum field only understands one language: the real frequency of your presence. If your observation is loaded with tension, the field responds with more tension. If your observation is a constant search for solutions, but comes from a sense of lack, the field returns more scarcity scenarios. It's a feedback loop that only breaks when you do something that seems counterintuitive. Stop fighting with what you see, but pay attention. It's not about conforming, nor pretending everything is fine when it's not. The way out of this cycle is not about denial. It's about crossing the layer of reactivity and accessing another state of consciousness. There is a place within you that observes without judgment, that witnesses without reacting, a neutral field where your gaze ceases to be an extension of pain and becomes a portal of transformation. But to touch that place, you must first recognize that the current cycle won't break with more effort, nor with more control. The only way out is to change the internal state of the observer. There is a space within you that has always been there. A point of consciousness that doesn't react, doesn't judge, doesn't compare. It simply witnesses. This state is not a theory, not a technique, and also not a concept to be understood intellectually. It is a direct experience, simple, but profoundly transformative. The witnessing consciousness is what remains. When all mental agitation falls silent, when the need to control, to understand, to predict, gives way to a kind of presence that simply observes, with total neutrality. It's not apathy. It's not indifference. It's a gaze that sees, but doesn't distort, that perceives, but doesn't condition, that welcomes, but doesn't cling. It is the state that Thoth, and so many other masters throughout history, pointed to as the key to true inner freedom, because when you inhabit this space, the world can keep moving, circumstances can change, the body can feel, thoughts may come and go, but you remain as the silent observer, unshakable, centered. The great revelation is that, as long as you remain identified with the reactive field, every observation you make will carry a signature of struggle. But when you access the witnessing consciousness, even the densest emotions lose their power to drag you along. Fear may appear, but you see it as a visitor, not as a sentence. Anxiety may arise, but you observe it like a wave, knowing it will pass, without needing to merge with it. The difference is that now you look without the weight of judgment. You no longer need to ask yourself whether what you feel is right or wrong, whether you should be happy or not, whether you are moving forward or backward. Everything simply is, and in this recognition, the energy that was once trapped in resistance begins to dissolve. Many people spend years trying to change thoughts, control feelings, modify behaviors, but without ever touching this state of inner neutrality. That's why cycles repeat. Because the key is not in changing the content of the mind, it's in changing the quality of the presence that observes the mind. When you witness, without tension, without wanting to manipulate the moment, the quantum field responds with a softness that previously seemed inaccessible. Answers arrive. External scenarios begin to reorganize. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stepped out of the cycle of resistance you had been sustaining. And maybe, now, as you listen to me, you can feel a bit of this space. A silence between one thought and the next. A gap between an emotion and the automatic reaction that would usually follow. This space is the portal to real transformation. If in some way this content resonated with what you feel, I want to invite you to do two things now. First, leave your like on this video, not just as a mechanical gesture, but as a conscious choice to support content that helps you access this place of presence. And second, if this message reached you, right here in the comments, I choose to witness. Let this be your first step to anchor this new quality of gaze in your life. Recognizing when your observation is contaminated is perhaps one of the greatest acts of internal honesty you can have with yourself. Because contamination doesn't arrive in a blatant way. It comes subtly, disguised as legitimate concern, dressed as responsibility, but deep down, always carrying the same signature: tension, expectation of a problem, and an invisible state of defense. The first sign is the body. Even before the mind formulates a thought, the body is already reacting to the vibrational field of your observation. Contracted shoulders, short breathing, stomach on alert, a diffuse sensation that something is wrong, even when there is no apparent reason. The body always knows. It registers the field before the rational mind can name what's happening. Another clear sign is the inability to remain in the present. When your observation is contaminated, you simply can't just be here. There is always a projection into the future, trying to predict the next problem, or an obsessive return to the past, revisiting mistakes, conversations, unresolved decisions. The mind wanders, but the point of attention remains the same. What could go wrong? What's missing? What still threatens your peace? And perhaps the most silent of all symptoms is the resistance to accepting what is. When observation is contaminated, everything needs to be fixed, improved, corrected. There's an emotional urgency to modify the scenario, whether external or internal. You look at emotions and already want to change them. Look at the body and already want to relieve it. Look at others and already feel the need to control or adjust. Everything becomes a reason for an internal micro-battle. The reactive field, that we talked about earlier, continues operating, but now, with an extra layer of frustration, because you already know you shouldn't be reacting this way. You're already aware that you're stuck in negative observation, but even so, you can't get out. And this creates a second cycle of suffering, the spiritual guilt cycle. You blame yourself for not being able to stay present, for still feeling anxiety, for still observing with fear, and this guilt contaminates your observation even more, as if there were a silent pressure that your spiritual evolution should be faster, more consistent, cleaner. But the truth is that recognizing the contamination is already a huge step, because most people don't even get to this point. Most live completely merged with the reactive gaze, believing they're just being realistic, just reacting to the world as it is. The problem is that as long as you're looking at reality from a field of tension, everything you perceive will be an extension of your own resistance. If you observe silence and feel restlessness, it's your resistance manifesting. If you look to the future and only see threat, it's your contamination speaking. If you try to relax, but the mind keeps searching for what's missing, it's the reactive field still holding you. And no, this is not a mistake. It's not a character flaw. It's just a neurological and vibrational pattern that's been reinforced for years, maybe decades. A field that only exists because it's been fed. The good news is that all of this can start to change the moment you make the choice to observe, without further tensing what you see. But before learning how to redirect this gaze, it's essential that you recognize these signs, that you accept with compassion that your observation still carries layers of fear, expectation, and defense. Not to blame yourself, but to finally have clarity. When you realize that your observation is contaminated, the immediate impulse is to try to think differently, to look for a mental solution, to force positive affirmations, to repeat mantras in the hope that the vibration will quickly change. But the problem is that this movement still comes from the same field of resistance. You're still fighting against what you feel, trying to swap one layer of thought for another, without changing the internal state of the one who observes. Real redirection doesn't start with words, it starts with a pause. Before trying to change what you're thinking, or what you're feeling, you need to interrupt the cycle of automatic reaction. And this interruption happens in the body. The first step is simple, but profoundly transformative. Feel your own body without trying to change anything. Not as a forced technique, but as a return to the most basic presence. When you feel the body, without labeling, without judging, the mind field begins to slow down, because the body has always been in the now. It doesn't carry projections of the future, nor regrets of the past. It simply is. And by bringing your attention to it, you take the first real step toward changing the point from which you're observing. From this pause, the next move is not to choose a better thought, but to release the need to label what you're seeing. It's letting the scene, the emotion, the situation exist without automatically applying a meaning to it. It's not denying what's happening. It's not pretending that everything is fine. It's simply creating space between the stimulus and the response. In this space, redirection is born. When you can simply witness, without placing the weight of judgment, something subtle begins to happen. The internal tension starts to decrease. The energetic field that sustained the resistance begins to lose strength, and your observation, little by little, starts to change in quality. Instead of looking at fear, trying to nullify it, you simply begin to perceive it as a movement within your field that comes and goes, like any other internal phenomenon. Instead of looking at anxiety, wanting to get rid of it, you observe it like a passing cloud without identifying with it. This practice doesn't require you to think positively. It simply invites you not to feed the spiral of tension anymore. And maybe, at this moment, you're wondering, but what if negative thoughts continue? What if the mind keeps bringing images of fear, failure, or pain? The answer is simpler than it seems. You don't need to fight them. Because what feeds these thoughts is not their existence, but your identification with the content they bring. When you remain as the witness, the thoughts may keep coming, but they lose the power to drag you along. This is the essence of redirection, to step out of the position of the one who reacts and assume the position of the one who simply observes with a lighter, more open, more conscious gaze. Over time, the quality of your perceptions begins to change, not because you forced it, but because your internal frequency shifted at its base. You don't need to convince yourself that everything is fine. You don't need to fabricate artificial positivity. You just need to remain in the now, with less tension, with less judgment, and with more internal space. And life, inevitably, responds to this new field. This is not a one-time practice. It is a training of presence, a daily adjustment, where each time you notice the contamination returning, you make the choice to pause, feel, release the label, and simply witness. And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. What many still don't understand is that the quantum field, the reality you experience, doesn't respond to the exact content of your thoughts. It doesn't calculate how many times you tried to be positive, nor how many affirmations you repeated. The field responds to the real frequency with which you observe the now. This is one of the most uncomfortable and at the same time most liberating truths. For a long time you believed that thinking differently would be enough, that replacing negative thoughts with positive ones would suffice to change your vibration. But what happens is that even when the thoughts change, if the internal place from where you observe them remains loaded with tension, fear, and resistance, the field remains the same. Because the creation of reality doesn't happen in the content. It happens in the quality of presence. There is an almost invisible but absolutely determining difference between thinking positively and observing with lightness, between forcing a new thought and simply changing the internal lens from where you see everything. When the gaze changes, it doesn't mean that the problems disappear immediately, but the way you perceive them, how you welcome them, and how you relate to them completely transforms the vibrational response you emit. And it's at this new frequency that the field begins to reorganize. The universe doesn't react to the words you say, but to the field you sustain while saying them. When you observe with fear, even while declaring gratitude, the field reads the fear. When you observe with anxiety, even affirming that you are at peace, the field reads the anxiety. But when your gaze quiets, when you can simply be present, witness, without contracting, the field feels your surrender. And it's in this surrender that everything begins to change, not by effort, not by control, but because life can only deliver you something new. When you finally release the old pattern with which you were looking at it, the field only changes when the gaze changes. And this gaze is not about what you see. It's about the internal state from where you see. Maybe you've already lived moments like this, those instances when, suddenly, you realized you no longer needed to fight, that you could simply breathe and allow life to take its course. Moments when the body relaxed, the mind fell silent, and a sense of peace, with no apparent reason, took over you. And it was exactly in those moments that the field began to return a different reality to you. Because when your observation frees itself from contamination, life responds with synchronicity, with relief, with solutions that once seemed impossible. This is the true alchemy of consciousness. Not transforming the world out there, but transforming the gaze in here. It's not about thinking differently. It's about observing differently. And when that happens, what was once an obstacle becomes a passage. What once seemed like a blockage becomes an opening. What once was resistance becomes flow. Now, maybe, you understand why there's been so much repetition in your life, why certain cycles insist on returning. Not because you're failing, but because your gaze was still stuck in the same old place. But that can change, starting now, because you're not condemned to live reacting. You can choose to witness. You can choose to let go. You can choose to look from a place that doesn't carry the weight of the past, nor the anxiety of the future. Life, the field, the universe are always ready to respond to the gaze you choose to sustain. And maybe the great truth you needed to hear today is just this: you're not stuck. You're just looking from the wrong place. We've reached the end of our journey, and maybe now you're feeling what you've always been trying to reach: a bit more internal space, a bit more clarity, and perhaps a different silence within you. What we've seen here wasn't just a concept, but a new way of inhabiting your own gaze. The understanding that it's not the world that needs to change, but the internal place from where you observe it. What you're seeking isn't in circumstances, nor in ready-made answers. It's in the quality of your presence, here, now. If this message truly reached you, I want to invite you to leave a sign for me here in the comments, just so I know you stayed until the end. Write, "I choose the new gaze." And if this made sense, remember to like and share it with someone who also needs this perspective.